Hello and welcome to another session of the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi. The handout for today's discussion has been placed in the description box. For our mains detailed analysis, we'll be taking up two important topics, death penalty in India and the sugar industry in India. For the mains value addition, we'll focus on employment-related data and important government schemes. And finally, under our prelims pointers, we have four important topics for discussion. First, the PM Cares Fund. Second, H1N1 Influenza. Third, the Chief Election Commissioner. And fourth, GDP versus GNP, particularly in the context of recent forecasts suggesting a slowdown in India's GDP growth. So let us begin with the first topic today, which is regarding death penalty in India. So firstly, we need to understand what basically is death penalty or capital punishment. So it means that state is using death as a form of legally authorized mechanism of punishment for certain offences. Now, there are two questions that arise as a result of the issue of death penalty in India. The first question that arises is regarding the constitutional morality of death penalty itself. Can a constitutionally established democratic government like Indian government, which guarantees the right to life under Article 21, does it have the authority, or is it legally and ethically moral on the part of the state to take the life of citizens in case of certain circumstances or certain offences that they commit? This is the first question. The second question that arises is regarding the inflictment or the procedure by which this death penalty is executed. So the basic mechanism is hanging the person with rope by his neck until death. So the humanity part and the ethical part of this inflictment of this punishment, that is under question. So today, under this article, only the second part has been discussed, but we will also be discussing the first part, which is regarding the constitutional morality of death statements. Firstly, we need to understand that there was a case in consideration before the Supreme Court, which was named as Rishi Malhotra versus Union of India. This was the case. Under this case, basically Supreme Court was examining this mechanism of inflictment of the death penalty. Now it has rejected a petition which was challenging certain sections. You must remember section 354 clause 5 of the Criminal Procedure Code, which today corresponds to the section 393 clause 5 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Suraksha Sanhita of 2023, which mandates hanging as the sole execution method currently approvable by the state in India. So there has been lack of evidence. The Supreme Court has stated that right now we do not have ample evidence or ground to say that there is some alternative mechanism which is less painful, less harmful to the dignity of the individual, and in the light of that, it is currently upheld. The Supreme Court has currently upheld that the mechanism which is right now being used is the best mechanism. Now, because of the flaws in global alternatives, what are the alternatives that are available? For example, the lethal injection, electrocution, lethal gas, or shooting. These are the alternatives that are available. All of them, we have no evidence, no proven evidence or demonstrable advantage over hanging of any of these mechanisms. But the future scope, it has been left open for discussion. We will be discussing multiple constitutional issues that arise as a result of this. Firstly, we need to see where does India stand on the issue of death penalty or on the issue of capital punishment. So we need to understand that there are three categories under which any state or country right now is falling. First is the abolitionist states or countries. Second is abolitionist unless grave or exceptional circumstances. Now these exceptional circumstances include anything like the war crimes. And the third category of states is the retentionist states. So India falls under retentionist category of states, which currently approves the inflictment of death penalty. However, it is put under severe restrictions. So it is not a liberal form of giving punishments, rather it is highly restricted by various measures that we will be discussing, that the Supreme Court has given several guidelines in several of the cases. First, we need to understand the constitutional aspect related to this, that Article 21, we know it guarantees the right to life and personal liberty to all the citizens. Under the right to life is also the right to a dignified death. Now, we need to understand that when we are talking about this right to life and liberty, there is a clause which says that unless prescribed or unless it is given an authority by the procedure established by law. So this is a phrase that has been used, procedure established by law. It means that if any law is, which means that if any law, it legally permits the taking away of the life of an individual, in that case it will be absolutely legal. Now, the ambit of the procedure established by law, it has been expanded by the government, by the Supreme Court in fact, under the Menka Gandhi versus Union of India case of 1978, wherein the ambit has now been increased to the due process of law, because the Supreme Court has stated that the mechanism by which you are taking away the life or the liberty of an individual, it has to be fair, it has to be transparent, it has to have justice in the process also. Now, it is also in violation, or we can say something that comes into consideration is also Article 14, because it guarantees the right to equality. Why does the right to equality come into picture? Because when we are discussing about the execution, it is basically taking after the sentences which are given by the judiciary. Judiciary in this case has a discretion. Now, the discretion also creates space for arbitrariness by the judiciary. So, two people who have been convicted of similar offences, one could be given a death penalty and the other one maybe could be given a life sentence. In that case, the person's right to equality, it will be disturbed or it will be taken away. Also, there are certain clemency powers. So, the president, after the sentence has been proclaimed, still the president has the powers to either remit, commute, respite, maybe also suspend the death sentence that has been given. There are several provisions. Article 161 of the Constitution, it expands the similar powers to governor, wherein the executive space of the state government is involved. Now, let us move to the next discussion, which is regarding what has judiciary spoken about this issue. So, firstly, this issue was taken up in the case of Jagmohan Singh versus the state of Uttar Pradesh in 1973, in which Supreme Court stated that inflicting a death penalty or a capital punishment, it is totally valid and it is not violative of Article 14, 19 and 21 of the Constitution, because we are taking in the procedure established by law, wherein we are specifically considering the circumstances of that case and the nature of the crime. This is what judiciary stated. However, the stance of judiciary, it was totally reversed in Rajendra Prasad versus the state of UP case in 1979, wherein it was stated that it is violative of Article 19, 20, 14, 19 and 21. In this, we must remember that it was Justice Iyer. He basically, what his stance was, that we now need to remove our consideration from only thinking about the crime, rather our approach should be to think about the criminal. So we have to look into the specific circumstances which may be pushed the person to commit that crime. It took in a more human angle to or a more human perspective to how things should be done, and thereby he stated should be two things that must be ensured. First is the recording of the special reason due to which judiciary has inflicted this punishment, and second, that it can only be inflicted under extraordinary circumstances, basically taking in the perspective of the offender or the convict in this case. Now, this was again reversed in Bachchan Singh versus state of Punjab case of 1980. If you are to remember only one case or one judgment related to this topic, this has to be the Bachchan Singh case. The reason being, it again overruled the Rajendra Prasad and reverted to the position that was held in Jagmohan Singh, that though it is not violative of Articles 14, 19 and 21, it is absolutely constitutional, but still it again gave a principle, rarest of the rare cases, which means that the circumstances, they have to be such. Again, you need to keep in mind that this is not only regarding a heinous crime, that this was a severe crime, so death penalty should be given. Rather, it has given this doctrine in a more detailed way. So there are certain mitigating circumstances and there are certain aggravating factors which we will be discussing in detail. Basically, if there is a balance that is drawn between the two, it is thought after, and still if judiciary believes that inflicting life imprisonment as a punishment is going to be insufficient, only in those cases then death penalty is to be given. Now, what are these aggravating factors? So these are basically the factors which might push the judiciary to inflict death penalty. It could be that the way the crime was done, it was barbaric. Maybe there was high amount of brutality that was involved, exceptional depravity. Maybe the way in which the crime was commissioned, it was highly heinous, highly inhuman. Maybe the person has committed several murders, or it could be that the person against whom the crime has been committed, the victim, he was a very vulnerable person, and still the offender, he went on to commit the crime. Ultimately, he is posing a threat to the society. These should be the conditions under which it authorized or stated that it is okay if you give death penalty. Now, it has to be balanced with the mitigating circumstances. So, mitigating circumstances is basically taking in the perspective of the offender as well. Was he coming from a very disturbed family background? What is his mental condition? What is his psychological or psychiatric condition at this time? Was his circumstances, were they forcing him to do any such crime? Is he in sound mental state? What has been his record after he has been in the jail, in the custody? How has he behaved? Is there any chance of reform or re-inclusion of the person after certain kind of treatment into the society? All of these things, they need to be taken in, thinking about the offender also. And if the judiciary has taken in both perspectives, still it believes that it is highly improbable that there is no scope left for the improvement or for the reform of the person, and it finds it necessary to inflict a capital punishment, only then it should be done. Afterwards, we need to discuss the Machi Singh case versus the state of Punjab. In this, there were 5 categories that were said to be there. First, we should be taking in the manner of commission of murder. So, was it done in a very heinous, inhuman way? What was the motive? Was it very depravatory to the human race as such? Was it very mean? Is there going to be any kind of anti-social tendencies or social abhorrent nature of the crime, which means that the crime was such that if the person is still left out into this society, he is going to be of grave harm. What was the magnitude? Was this a very extensive? Does this have implications on several fronts? What is the personality of the victim? Now, this is not a checklist, but something that these are certain principles which need to be considered before giving the punishment. Now, before discussing the Deena case, we need to discuss the Mithu versus the state of Punjab case of 1983, which basically involved the section 303. So, what was there in section 303? It basically said that in cases wherein a person is right now undergoing a life imprisonment and he still commits a murder, in that case, it is going to be mandatory death punishment that is going to be given to the person. Now, this was essentially taking away the kind of what you call as discretion that is allowed to the judiciary, under which it takes the circumstances of the cases into consideration and then gives the judgment based on its own considerations. That was taken away. Therefore, this section was taken down. Now coming to the Dina versus Union of India case, this is the case wherein what we are discussing today in today's article, that if the procedure wherein we are hanging the person by rope, is this human? Is this fair? Does this not violate the dignity? Is it again according to the international standards? Because a person, even after being a criminal, he doesn't lose his basic human rights. All of this was discussed, but still it was found that out of all the available alternatives that we have, still hanging is the best possible way of inflicting the punishment. Why so? Because consider the other forms that we have earlier discussed. Say we take into consideration the lethal injection mechanism. Herein we need a number of things. So basically when we are hanging the person, it is more of a mechanism which is technically very relaxed. So you don't need a number of things. Whereas consider the alternatives, like for example, you need to administer an injection, you need certain drugs, you need the medical personnel. What if the injection is injected, it is not done according to the right procedures? What if there are certain complications? What if the person still remains conscious and he is suffering from immense pain? What will be done in that case? So those are the questions that remain unanswered for the other ways. Now consider shooting. What if it is only even after shooting the person is left with an injury which is lifelong, but it doesn't inflict death? Consider, for example, electrocution. How are you going to implement it? So all the other mechanisms, they were not found to be again less painful. If they are less painful, that was also not established, and they were also not administratively possible. So this was again upheld in the Dina versus Union of India case. But right now the judiciary, it took into consideration the fact that after the case judgment in 1983, still a number of developments have taken place when it comes to the technical front, the scientific front, or when it comes to basically the understanding of how law is evolving. So we always say that our constitution is an organic document. So at all times, we must be implementing or looking for better things or better ways. Similar applies to looking for less painful human mechanisms to administer any kind of punishment. Because that is again stated, number 1, under the United Nations Covenant on the Civil and Political Rights. You must be remembering and mentioning it. Number 2, it is also given under the UN ECOSOC safeguards of 1984. We need to at all times aspire to be in line with what the global community is telling us and in line with the human rights. What is the global perspective? So there are a number of states which have completely abolished or given up inflicting death penalty for any kind of offenses. You can see it here in the map that these are the countries which still have death penalty as a form of punishment. Amongst the countries which are giving such punishments, China holds the highest record of giving more judgments which have death penalty as a punishment. Now, the 20-year trend says that the total number of states which conduct executions and which impose death sentences every year, that is constantly decreasing. Now, if we are to analyze this topic from a balanced perspective, we need to firstly look at the arguments in favor of and then against the death penalty. Similar is the approach that we have for all our main topics, wherein we also try to put in the positive picture and also criticize whatever is being done. So the similar thing we are going to do here. First, is it that it is retributive justice, which was highly supported by Immanuel Kant. So what was Kant's philosophy? That if any state is to basically ensure a substantive amount of justice to the aggrieved party. In that case, it has to give death penalty for a murder. So substantive justice, if we are to ensure, then death for death, that is basically what Immanuel Kant stated. Now, he was against the utilitarian perspective, which states that we are inflicting the death punishment only because it is going to be beneficial for the society. So this kind of usefulness was not something he was giving. Rather, it was the eye for an eye approach, wherein it is retributive. It is going to give the aggrieved family a sense of justice, that justice has been given to us. That emotion is going to be there in the aggrieved party. Again, the rarest of the rare case wherein we are highly restricting the punishment, that is also something we are using in favor of the death penalty. It will have a deterrent effect. Why? Because it leads to incapacitation. Now, basically this argument states that if a person he is executed, now he doesn't remain in a position that he will maybe escape or that he will commit some offense again. So basically society will be protected and the guilty, he will be punished. And it is also said to be cost effective. Now we also need to put this perspective against the perspective that even if life imprisonment, it is ensured that it is implemented to a good degree, even that can ensure the deterrent effect. So we don't need to take a life if we are to only give the deterrent effect principle much importance. That is not required. Even the cost effectiveness argument, it is also again found to be not very having very solid grounds. The reason being that the process which is involved in this case, because wherein say a sessions court or a lower court, it announces a death statement, then the case is going to go to the high court. After that, maybe appeals will be filed. After that, mercy petition will be filed. Now this is also something that is taking up the state's resources. Now we also need to take the arguments against. First is our focus on reformative justice in recent years, which basically states that our basic goal is not to punish the person who has committed some crime. Rather, we want to reform the society. We want to be a better place. That is why it is more suggestive of a reformist approach. Now this is antithesis of one's right to life, because we are guaranteeing right to life under Article 21. Now Albert Camus, he was a person who was highly suspective of this approach of inflicting death punishments, because he stated that capital punishment is basically a murder that is committed by the state. Again, the biggest concern that we need to keep in mind is the irreversibility. So if there is a case in which a conviction happens and the person was not guilty, still we have a space, a scope wherein we can reform the process, wherein we can maybe also compensate the person regarding the years that he has spent under custody. But what if the death execution, if it is implemented and the person was not guilty? So this is a process which is highly irreversible. Then there is also the fallibility, that our judicial system, it can also at times commit errors. There can be errors in our investigation process. There can be errors when it comes to the statements given by certain evidences. Also the kind of statements that the person who is guilty, he is himself making. So his own submissions, they can also be altered, because we see that there are mental health issues, wherein if a person is confined within four walls for a long time, then it can lead to increase in isolation, increase in the anxiety levels of the person. So he is basically not in a mental state or in a sound state of mind to even understand how the process is going on, what is the punishment that he is being given. So this basically, again, we also discussed that the deterrence can also be established by certain other mechanisms. We don't need to inflict death punishment for that. Also the moral high ground, wherein judiciary has itself stated that a delay in the execution of the death sentence, that in itself is enough evidence or enough ground for the reconsideration of the death penalty, because the person, he has already gone through so much of mental trauma because of that. Then comes the international human rights standards that we've discussed regarding the UN Covenant on the Civil and Political Rights, and also the UN ECOSOC safeguards that were announced in 1984. Then we also need to take in consideration the cost part of it. Now you also need to look at one analysis of certain data. First is that in between the time frame of 2016 to 2025, 1310 death sentences were announced by the Sessions Court. After that, we need to see that in the last 3 years, 0 death sentences have been confirmed by the Supreme Courts. 128 sentences alone announced in 2025 alone. Now, 842 death sentences were heard by the High Courts, 70 confirmed, which makes the percentage to nearly 8.31%. So herein we are seeing that the acquittal rate is high and the conviction rate is very low. What does this data indicate? That maybe the lower courts, they are using this provision very liberally and they are giving death punishments too often, and the higher courts are then not confirming those punishments or those sentences. Some evidence we also see here, it has found that in some states where capital punishment is already a punishment mechanism, there the murder rates are rather higher. So we basically have no ground to say that if this is a form of punishment that is there, then it will create enough deterrence in society. When we are talking about deterrence, we are basically talking about two kinds of deterrence. First is the general deterrence, that whenever such provisions are put into law, then it will be act as a form of deterrent to the entire society in general, which will then maybe not think of committing those heinous crimes. The second kind of deterrence is the specific deterrence, wherein the person who is involved in that case, he will not then be tempted to commit the crime again. That is basically the philosophy underlying our punishment laws. Herein, 88% of the criminologists, they state they do not believe that death penalty is an effective deterrent to the society. Now, long periods which are spent in the confines of death row have caused incarcerated people to develop mental health issues, and the aging death row population requires more and more care as they become elderly. This is the cost part that we are talking about here in this argument. Now, what are the challenges and what is the way forward basically? First is the systemic failure of the trial courts to follow the constitutional safeguards and to follow the Supreme Court's guidelines. Then comes the high risk of wrongful convictions, because the capacity building and the sensitization of trial court judges on mitigation and sentencing hearing. You must remember the mitigation that we discussed in detail. So there is very less amount of sensitization or awareness of these principles when it comes to the trial court judges. Coming to the arbitrary use of life imprisonment without remission. So there needs to be a development of a clear statutory framework governing life imprisonment without remission. Now there is a gap which is existing between the evolving constitutional jurisprudence and the ground level judicial practice. Strengthening legal aid and defense representation in capital cases is something we need to ensure. So this argument is basically stating that what is constitutionally prescribed mechanism of jurisprudence and what is happening on the ground level, the way justice is being delivered, those are two different things. And also it is stating that when it involves the capital cases, then we also need to ensure as a part of the mitigation process only, that if the person is coming from, say, a weaker socio-economic background, the person needs to be given sufficient amount of legal representation. He should have the capacity to represent himself. What is basically the way forward from here is to ensure that our judicial process as such, starting from the investigation until the proven guilty phase, that has to be robust. So the people who are convicted of offences and not committed those offences, that should not happen. Basically, this entire process needs to be made more robust. We also need to keep in mind the human rights, the dignity part of it, the international angle, and thereby we also need to also at all times keep on considering or taking in recommendations from certain panels, certain expert panels, which tell us about both these questions, the answers to both these questions. Is it ethical? Is it legal to still continue with capital punishment? And also the form of executing the punishment. Now you can practice this mains question that has been given to you. Answer it in 150 words. So we'll begin our discussion for the second topic today, which is regarding the sugar industry. So when we are basically discussing this industry, we are not merely confined to the production of sugar. Rather, we are discussing agriculture, we are discussing irrigation, water sustainability, farmers' income, the ethanol sector as such. We are also taking into consideration the environmental sustainability part, the farmer cooperatives. So a lot of stakeholders are involved in this industry. Therefore, it becomes of utmost importance for us to discuss it in detail. First is regarding the sugarcane production. So you must remember the large data. So India is producing around 490 to 500 million tons of sugarcane, which is produced annually, and the land involved is 5.5 million hectares of cultivated area that is involved. Now, what are the climatic requirements for sugarcane? You must remember this from your prelims perspective as well, that it is a tropical and a subtropical crop which requires two kinds of weather. First, requiring the hot, humid conditions during the growth phase, and then requiring the cooler and dry weather conditions during the ripening phase, which will lead to high amount of sucrose content or sugar accumulation while it is about to be ripe. A long frost-free period is required, wherein there has to be adequate sunlight and there has to be adequate moisture, which is essential for the healthy development of the crop. Now, the temperature requirement is between 20 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius for overall growth, and when it comes to during the ripening phase, it has to be 12 to 14 degrees Celsius. The rainfall requirement is of about 75 to 150 centimeter of rainfall. So this is basically a water intensive crop, but at the same time you must remember that water logging is something that is not good for the crop because it will damage the roots of the crop, and that is why this is an anomaly. You must remember the sunlight requirement is that it requires bright sunshine for efficient photosynthesis and sugar formation. Humidity, it requires hot and humid conditions, and the frost and cold frost should not be there. When it comes to sugar production, so India is the largest producer in the world as per the data stated by PIB, especially when we see the growth of this industry. So this has been consistently increasing. Now coming to the cropping seasons, so there are various varieties of sugarcane which are of different durations. The cropping time is also different for each one of them. So the autumn crop, it is usually planted during the phase of October to November. The major regions which are planting this is North India that is involved in this case. Now this involves slow growth in winter and rapid kind of maturing that happens during the springtime, leading to higher yield. Now spring crop, which is basically sown from Feb to March, this is the short duration crop of 6 to 8 months, and it also reduces the yield of the crop. Then the pre-seasonal cropping that happens during the July to August phase, this involves the growth phase involves 15 to 18 months. Now, as it is a long duration crop, we know that it is going to give us higher biomass and yield. Next variety is that of Eksali, which is grown during the January to February phase. It is planted, then it is grown in South India for 12 months, and it is widely practiced. Coming to the climatic needs that are required, there are also certain terms that you must remember. So if there is a question stating Nayana, Karan 4, what are these requiring? What are these varieties related to which sector? So you must remember that these are related to the sugarcane sector. Now, at different growth stages, for example, during the germination stage, it requires warm soil conditions. Ideally, the temperature has to be between 32 to 38 degrees Celsius, ensuring good sprouting of the crop. During the active growth phase, wherein the stem, the leaves growth is happening, at that time, hot and humid and rainy conditions, they should be present. When it comes to the ripening phase, cool, dry and sunny days with cool nights, they are ideal for maximum sucrose accumulation. Now coming to the methods of sugarcane cultivation in India, first is the land preparation. So the land has to be tilled or plowed 2 to 3 times. After that, it has to be leveled, and then proper drainage has to be ensured that there is no water logging which is harmful to the sugarcane production. How do we select the seed material? So the seed has to be healthy, disease free, and they are selected from the approved varieties. When it comes to the sowing method or the growing method, then there are two methods. The first is the bud chip settling method. What happens in this method is that single buds, they are removed from the cane and they are basically grown in a nursery. After sufficient growth, they will be replanted back onto the field. This method ensures that there is uniformity of the crop, and the planting material which is available with us, that is also more efficiently utilized. The second method is of tissue culture planting, under which the seedlings, they are prepared from tissue culture which are genetically uniform. So you can ensure that the quality of the product that is going to be produced is going to be uniform and also disease free, resulting in higher yield and better sugar recovery. What are the planting methods? The furrow method is basically most common in the irrigated areas, wherein furrows are dug and within those the plantations are placed. The trench and ring pit method, they are used in high rainfall areas or the water scarce region. Spacing and planting depth, it has to be ensured so that sufficient amount of sunlight, sufficient moisture, the nutrients which are available to the roots, the space is available for that. To ensure that, we need to make sure that the plants, they are spaced at required gap from each other. Coming to the irrigation management, so frequent irrigation is required, especially during the growing stages. Now we need to see that since it is a water guzzling crop, and there are also tendencies to grow this crop in the water scarce regions. Therefore, we need to take up new technologies, for example, drip irrigation method, which can sufficiently reduce, for instance, it can reduce the water uptake by 30 to 40%. So that is the efficiency we can bring in if we bring in new forms of irrigation methods. The nutrient management, organic manure, it requires nitrogen, it requires phosphorus for the roots, it requires potassium also, so as to ensure the quality and the strength, nitrogen for the growth and phosphorus for the roots. Harvesting usually takes place depending on the varieties, depending on the region in which we are growing. It varies between 10 to 18 months after planting. What is the economic importance of sugarcane in India? It is one of the most important commercial and industrial crops, not just agricultural, not just limited to the agriculture sector as such. So, sugar industry, it basically involves multiple things. It involves the transportation, it involves packaging, it involves marketing, it involves the processing sector also. Then direct livelihood to millions of farmers, not just farmers, but also the agricultural laborers. Also the people or the workers who are involved in the sugar mills. Also this crop is acting as a raw material for the ethanol production. So we have been seeing the emphasis that is being put on E20. Therefore, the sugar cane, which is basically the primary raw material, that becomes of importance. Now, a fibrous kind of byproduct of the sugar cane industry, which is known as bagasse, it is widely used for electricity generation, basically promoting us towards clean energy and renewable energy. This becomes important because we are trying to shift our focus from the fuels, for example, we have a lot of oil dependency, which leads to high amount of forex reserve requirements. That is a burden on the Indian fiscal space. That is why we need to focus more on co-generation, which can happen through the cleaner mechanisms like the bagasse. Now, molasses, these are again another kind of byproduct of the sugarcane industry, used widely in alcohol sector, in pharma sector, in chemical industries. Now, when it comes to the production of sugar, it is not basically limited to the large sector or to the formal sector only. Rather, it involves the local production of jaggery, which is known as good in certain regions of India, and the khansari, which is basically supporting the rural space, the small sector enterprises which are functioning in the rural areas in this area. Now, this sector is also encouraging the growth of cooperative institutions. So, we know that the sugar cooperatives, they occupy a large space of the farmer cooperative sector as such. So, especially in the states like Maharashtra and Gujarat, we see such cooperatives exercising large amount of decision-making authority. Then it also contributes to foreign exchange earnings by number one, directly exporting the sugar that we are producing, and number two, also through this indirect mechanism wherein we are trying to reduce our import dependence. Then rural development, industrial growth, and energy security. All of these frontiers are taken care of if this industry is functioning well. What are the government policies and support mechanisms when it comes to the sugar sector? Number one is the fair and remunerative price. What is this? This is the floor price that is announced by the government, at which the mills, they are supposed to take the sugarcane crop from the farmers. Next comes above this price, also certain states, they advise their own prices. That is known as state advised price. Certain states that declare these prices include Uttar Pradesh. Then comes the policy of ethanol blending program, wherein we are trying to blend ethanol with our petroleum. Next is the interest subvention scheme. What is happening in this scheme, that when the sugar mills, they are taking loans, they are being given loans at subsidized rates so that they can clear their dues which they have towards the farmers. Then export assistance measures, they are also being taken care of so that we are able to, number one, clear the extra sugar that we have so that we don't require the storage space. The excess of sugar, that will be taken care of. Number two, the prices which the farmers will be getting, they will be better, and also the export, that will also contribute to our forex reserves. Then comes the support to the ethanol distilleries, that is also being promoted. Now, seeing in detail what this fair and remunerative price mechanism is, you must remember that there are two bodies which are involved in this case. First is the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. This fixes the FRP, which is the fair and remunerative price, on the basis of recommendations of CACP, which is Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices. So, CACP is advising the prices and the final decision is taken by CCEA, which is the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. While determining this price, there are certain factors that need to be taken care of. First is the cost of production of sugarcane. What are the returns? So, we are not only trying to cover the cost to the farmers, we are also trying to ensure that they also get some remuneration. Also, this crop, it has to be at parity when the farmer is, suppose say they are growing some other crop, then the amount of remuneration they are getting, that similar kind of remuneration we are trying to ensure in this sector also. Then the domestic prices of sugar and the international prices of sugar are also taken into consideration. The next concept which comes into picture is sugar recovery rate. So, the prices or the support mechanism, it is not going to be uniform. This is the rate which tells us what is the amount of sugarcane juice that we are getting from a specific amount of quantity of sugarcane. This ensures that there is quality production, because the more the sugarcane juice we are going to get, the better is supposed to be the productivity of the sugarcane. The final FRP is notified under the Sugarcane Control Order, making it mandatory for sugar mills to pay farmers at least this price. So basically this is the floor price. Farmers will be getting at least this price. In the market, they can even get higher prices. This is basically the operating method of the FRP. It acts as a minimum guaranteed price, protecting the farmers from any kind of volatility and ensuring that they at least get some kind of income security or basic price. What are the challenges to the sugarcane production in India, and what are the challenges which have been specifically highlighted in this article? So there has been certain recent happenings or certain change that is bringing that has been brought up in this sector, due to which we are discussing. Firstly, let us discuss the generic challenges. First is the high water requirement. Second is the delayed payment to farmers, because the sugar mills, they are themselves under a lot of financial stress. That is why they are not able to clear their dues to the farmers on time. Third is the low amount of mechanization, which makes it compulsory that we have to involve humans when it comes to the harvesting of the product, which leads to delays. There are also lack of availability of labor at some times. Then there is also issue of pests and diseases, for example, red rot, borers and wilt. There is also rising input costs. Then there is also price volatility. So this is a cycle which is a cycle of surplus and deficit. So what happens is, say in a given year, the prices of sugar, it went high. The next year, what is going to happen? A lot of farmers are going to cultivate the same crop, leading to then falling of the price of sugar. Now this will be a deterrent. Next year, there will be very low supply and very high prices. This is a cycle that continues. There are also environmental concerns because of this being a water guzzling crop. And in today's time of high amount of climate change, since this is a crop that requires predictable weather conditions or climatic conditions, it is very difficult to ensure those conditions in today's time when there is high amount of disturbance when it comes to rainfall or the moisture availability or the temperatures as such. Therefore, we also need to focus on building more climate resistant varieties. Next is the challenges which has been highlighted in this article. First is the rapid industry mechanization. So what is happening in certain areas? Now the human labor force, that is being replaced by the machines. This is solving a lot number of problems that we were earlier facing. For example, the lack of availability of labor. But then it is also creating one more issue, which is how are we going to reorganize the labor that is going to get free? Because this is providing seasonal employment to a large number of people. Now those people, they are forced to get kind of adjusted either through the mechanism of daily wage laborers, or they become goat herders. So now the issue that is arising is of providing skilling to these people. Also the people who are involved in this case, we are going to see that they are coming from vulnerable sections. So let us look at these points. First is the severe labor shortages, because the mills, they were earlier facing shortage of manual cutters. High adoption rate of machines target for full automation. So the mill owners, they say that for the land areas which involve more than 1 hectare of sugarcane production, within 3 years, we are targeting 100% mechanization or automation of this sector. So the workers, they are going to get displaced. Now there is another kind of technicality that is coming in, is that Supreme Court has announced certain measures which are welfare measures for the workers. Now it is being stated in the article that this kind of move towards automation is happening because of these measures that have been announced, taking in the considerations or the social security of these workers. What is the way forward? First, we need to focus on the alternative irrigation mechanisms like the drip irrigation. Then we also need to encourage crop diversification, especially when it comes to the water stressed regions. We also need to strengthen the ethanol production so that the surplus of the sugar that we have in this sector, that can be easily diverted. The mechanization, it needs to improve. At the same time, we need to take into consideration the people who are involved. So more than 50% of the workers involved in this case are women. We are simultaneously trying to ensure that women should enter the labor force participation rate. We are trying to ensure that women empowerment should take place. So all of these considerations also need to be taken care of. The next is developing climate resilient varieties in light of the climate change happening and ensuring the timely payments to the farmers. Now here is another mains practice question that you can look at and practice for your for better preparation, and also two PYQs that have earlier appeared, one in 2020 regarding the trends in the cultivation of sugarcane in India, and the second regarding the FRP that we discussed in detail that appeared in 2015. Now coming to the mains value addition topic, which is regarding the employment guarantee schemes that have been in place. Firstly, we need to see that the MGNREGA that was earlier in place, what is it? It is basically providing rural employment as a legal entitlement. So this was a scheme that was demand based, that the government is going to provide you 100 days of wage employment. If it fails to do so, then you are going to get a compensation or unemployment benefit kind of amount. In the place of this MGNREGA, we have brought in VBGRMG. What has happened as a result of transitioning from that scheme to this scheme is, so this scheme was supposed to be made operational on 1st of April of 2026. But the administrative mechanism that was not put in place for the effective operationalization of this scheme. As a result, there has been 43% decline in the employment generated between this time frame of April to July of 2026. Now you must remember that this time frame of April to July is one time frame wherein the agriculture sector is able to absorb very less number of workers. As a result, the demand is usually high during this time, but the reverse is happening this year. We have seen 50% decline in July of 2026 as compared to the July of the previous year. Regional disparity, we have seen that 10 out of the 19 major states, they have witnessed a 60 to 85% decline. What has been the implementation gap that has been there, that we were lacking when it comes to the administrative mechanisms put in place, and that is why this has happened. So we need to keep in mind two facts. First is that lack of employment generation could be because of several reasons. First could be lack of demand, but also there could be the fact that we have been able to generate very low percentage of employment because of the lack of projects, because of the lack of implementation. The second fact we must keep in mind for our larger perspective when it comes to suggestive measures that we usually give for various sectors, that we need to increase the fiscal allocation to this particular department. So we are seeing a paradox here wherein the fiscal allocation has risen, but employment generation has fallen. So we can see that giving more amount of money is not going to ensure that the policies they are implemented to the best on the ground. The next thing we are seeing is the federal challenge that we are seeing, because these states, they are expected to contribute around 40%, which makes the center state coordination in this aspect very important. Also, we have seen that the kind of projects that are going to be made functional, they are going to be very local level. So it will involve the gram panchayats also. So it will involve coordination between the center and states, and also the state government and the local governments. The employment that we are providing involves many vulnerable groups, for example, the SC/ST households, the marginal farmers, the landless laborers, and also the rural women. The women empowerment also comes into picture. The last mile capacity, because the welfare reforms, they need administrative preparedness and institutional continuity, not merely a new law coming in that is not going to make a substantial difference as such. Another thing that has been involved with MG, NREGA also, and with this also, is the social audit part, wherein the social audits, they are conducted, seeing that there is the implementation of projects on ground. Also, the fiscal federalism part comes into picture, because there are certain states that do not have the fiscal wherewithal to implement or to put in place very high amount of fiscal resources. So the center has to fill in the gaps there. And the absorptive capacity, because the large allocations, they will yield results only when there is adequate amount of administrative and implementation capacities. Now this transition, not just for this scheme but also for any other section, we need to ensure that the transition, if we try to make it, then it has to be very smooth. The rural demand employment guarantee supports rural demand, because if a person is going to get employment, then he is going to demand more food, more clothing. Then the consumption of the rural sector as such is going to increase. That is going to contribute positively to our economic growth. It is also ensuring the inclusive growth, because we have seen the vulnerable sections involved. When they will be given more employment and more resources, that is going to bring in and will help us achieve the goals that we have set for poverty and other areas. The next is regarding the rights-based governance, because this is not a scheme wherein it is voluntary, rather it is mandatory for the government to provide the employment. What is the way forward that you can think of is talking about the seamless transition, talking about timely wage payments, and also increasing our administrative capabilities and the coordination between various levels of the government. The next article we are going to take up is related to the PM Cares Fund. So firstly, let us look at the details that it is a public charitable trust created in March of 2020, especially in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. So more or less, it is a voluntary charity-based trust fund that has been created. Who is the ex-officio chairman? It is the Prime Minister. So we have seen that the corpus has risen from 6,000 approximately 700 crore to more than 8,000 crore. Why is this happening? You are seeing a decline in the donations. So how come is the corpus increasing? It is increasing because the interest that it is accruing as a result of being in the fixed deposit part, that is increasing. So the interest income, they are rising. The utilization that has been very low, and it has rather fallen from 3,976 crore being utilized during the year of 2020 to 21 to less than 0.9 CR in 2024 to 25. There are certain graphs that you must be paying more attention to. First is regarding this corpus of the PM Cares Fund. It has continued to grow despite the utilization that is dropping after the COVID-19 pandemic. So the dispersal of the fund, it has decreased, but the corpus is increasing. The second is receiving during the year, which is reflected with the color blue, and the dispersed amount during the year, that has also been given year-wise. The next major thing we are witnessing here is that a lot of the fund that is being returned by the implementing agencies as such, also we have seen a shift wherein this amount has been transferred from the savings account to the fixed deposits. 93% is currently held in fixed deposits or FD. Audit transparency, so audited statements for years of 2023 to 24 and 24-25 have been released after significant delays in them. So key fact that we need to keep in mind that the increase has not been due to fresh contributions. What is the aim of this fund? This has been created for combating and containment and relief efforts against the coronavirus outbreak that was there, or any such pandemic situation if it comes in the future. What are the other objectives? To provide assistance and relief to all the affected persons in the event of any calamity, disaster, or emergency that takes place, and the creation and upgradation of any pharmaceutical facilities, funding for the research, creation and upgradation of infrastructure and healthcare support. The next article we have is regarding the H1N1. Now you must keep in mind that this is a virus. So the H stands for hemagglutinin and the N stands for neuraminidase. So H1N1 is a subtype of influenza A virus that primarily infects the respiratory system of a person. So you will be seeing here that the virus, it begins in the upper respiratory tract and then it goes to the lungs of the person. So the infection and inflammation of the lungs that happens, and then they get filled up with fluid. In that case, it becomes a severe infection that will lead to sudden fall in the oxygen saturation, and the person, he will need immediate hospitalization as a result of this infection. You also need to keep in mind that this kind of severity happens in very limited number of cases. Transmission, it happens through the droplets or aerosols. It can also spread through the contaminated hands or surfaces, followed by touching the nose, mouth or eyes. What are the common symptoms? You would be seeing fever, loss of appetite, loss of smell and taste, and fatigue that the person will be experiencing, headache, weakness, chills, body aches, cough or nausea. Now, what is the treatment? Most cases are self-limiting. Antiviral medicines, for example, oseltamivir, if this comes, because in recent years UPSC has been giving you certain terms and asking you what is the sector that it is related to, you must keep in mind. So antibiotics are of no use because this is not a bacteria. So the precautions obviously involve vaccination, hand hygiene, uses of mask, avoiding the crowded places, respiratory etiquettes, taking sufficient amount of rests, fluid, and avoiding eating out and conducting healthy lifestyle practices as such. For prelims, you must remember the various kind of subtypes of this virus. First is the influenza A, which is infecting birds. The influenza B is going to infect humans. Influenza C is going to infect humans and pigs. And D for cattle. What are the most common human viruses? H1N1 and H3N2. The next article we have is regarding the Chief Election Commissioner. So we would be looking at it from the polity dimension. You anyway would be reading this in the static part of your polity syllabus, wherein we know that Article 324 provides for the establishment of the Election Commission of India to conduct the free and fair elections to Parliament, to state legislature, to the offices of President and Vice President. Here you need to always remember that the conduct of elections to the state legislatures is under the ambit of Central Election Commission, or you can say the Election Commission of India. And the State Election Commission, it is involved only when it comes to the election to the local bodies. So the appointment, it is made by the President of India on the recommendation of a committee which is going to have Prime Minister, the Leader of Opposition and one Union Cabinet Minister. What is the tenure? So it is going to be 6 years or 65 years of age, whichever is earlier, to the Chief Election Commissioner's office. The conditions of service cannot be varied after the appointment takes place, so as to ensure that enough amount of independence is allotted to the office. What are the powers and functions? We all know that the superintendence, direction and control of the elections, that is taken care of. The second is preparation and revision of the electoral rolls. Third is regarding the conduct of free and fair elections. Fourth, regarding the enforcement of the model code of conduct. And the last one regarding the plenary powers to act in areas where the law is silent. What is the removal procedure? It is same as the Supreme Court judge, wherein there are only two grounds. One is that of proof misbehavior and the second that of incapacity. Now this also requires a procedure in the parliament wherein both the houses have to pass a motion requiring special majority, the majority requiring total membership, and also 2/3 of the members present and voting, that is required. And this high threshold, it is basically to ensure again that there is no arbitrariness in the removal procedure of the Chief Election Commissioner. Next, coming to the article on the forecast regarding the economic growth of India, which is expected to slow down as a result of high amount of inflation in the food and fuel economy, that too because of certain regions, including the West Asian crisis, including the El Nino effect on the monsoon of India, and several other factors like the weak currency of India. Now, in the light of this GDP forecast, we are going to see the basic difference between GDP and GNP. So, if we are to talk about it, GDP involves the territorial boundaries of India. So, any production that is happening within the boundaries of India, no matter who the person involved in that production process are, that is going to be called as the GDP of India. Here you must ensure or keep in mind that it includes the production by the residents plus the foreigners who are residing, currently operating from the soil of India. On the other hand, when it comes to GNP, we are basically considering the resident or the national part of it. So the Indians who are residing elsewhere, even their production is going to be included in GNP. We are going to see this with the help of an example. So firstly, let us come to the example. Suppose a Japanese company is earning 100 crores in India. For example, say it is producing cars. So it is earning 100 crores. Some Indian company which is operating in Japan is earning 50 crores. When it comes to the GDP of both the countries, this 100 crore which is being made in India will be considered as a part of the Indian GDP. This 50 crore which is being made by an Indian company in Japan is going to be taken into the GDP of Japan. Now coming to the GNP concept, that will not happen when it comes to GNP. Herein we are trying to balance out the net factor income from abroad. This is another concept. So what happens in GNP? This 50 crore which was being made by Indians will be taken as a part of the GNP of India and vice versa. What is the net factor income from abroad? That broadly we are going to calculate what all are Indians earning from abroad. Their income we are going to take. From this we are going to subtract the income that foreigners are making in India. As a result, we are going to get a net amount. This is net factor income of India. If we add this to GDP, then the net of GNP, gross national product, we are going to get. The key differences for prelims perspective, based on location, based on residency or ownership, production within the territory, production attributed to the nationals or to the residents, includes the foreign companies operating domestically, and includes the income from the nationals who are producing globally. Now, what is this excluding? Obviously, when we are including the foreigners, but we are excluding the Indians who are earning outside. Now, this, since it is including the income which is being produced by nationals, it is excluding the earnings of foreigners they are making in our domestic territory. These are the common features you need to keep in mind. That was all for today's discussion. Thank you so much.